Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course I'm joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and I'm also joined by John Doull right to my side here, and we are going to talk about the EU and Britain leaving the EU because of course historic time to be alive right now. Britain has decided to leave the EU. Brexit has passed. Nigel Farage is obviously quite happy about the results, and I wanted to kind of go over like an update with everyone here about what this means, what the EU really is, and just kind of go over what we've seen in the last few days. And then of course going from the ECC, the EC, going back to about 1954 and I believe it was called the Treaty of Rome, where they decided that this whole union, this globalist union, was going to be created. Now I wanted to start off by saying that it's nice to see so many people on TV talking about globalism. I've seen a lot of people this last week talking about globalism, and it's good to get that dialogue out there because we know one of the most pertinent and most dangerous issues that we face today is globalism and the facing down the new world order per se. So I wanted to kind of start off by saying, like, this is pulling off a band-aid quickly. What we've seen over the last week, we've seen markets crashing, and largely because people like Barclays and others have bet against leaving the EU, and that's their bad and they deserve what they get for that. But I feel like the market instability is kind of like pulling off a band-aid really quickly instead of slowly and prolonging the pain, which is going to cause so much suffering later on as long as the EU exists, as long as the euro is that singular monetary union currency. So who would like to start on this? Because this is, we've got so much to talk about here.
Well, we could go, they had their kind of Willem Wallace moment in the movie Braveheart where you're like, freedom!
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully they can, start to build on that and move into the right direction of individualism from the collectivist, European Union. Well, and also even their own sovereign government having a queen, that are controlling them. Hopefully they can kind of get some insight now by seeing the rulers from, the European Union and then start to see their own king and queen. Well,
yeah, this is like basically a chess game. We're the pawns, and we're supposed to be serving the queen and king, right? And we're supposed to sacrifice ourselves for the king and the queen. But of course, what we've seen with the market instability lately has been partly temporary, partly because of bad bets against them leaving the EU. So can you go into the economic side of this quickly, John?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of horrible bets around, and it first started with Japan, and it always starts in Japan. This is how 2008 started, because the yen is so liquid. And it's very readily available. It's one of the most liquid currencies and most available currencies other than the US dollars in the world economy. Now they plummeted about 8.96%, I believe. The final count was at the Nikkei, the night of, when everything happened on Friday.
Yeah.
And I was kind of up and I watched it and I was like, this sounds like something I predicted.
Yeah.
And all that it was, it's not like because of the European Union exit from Britain exited from the European Union. It has all to do with the horrible bets that the banksters like Barclays, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all the usual suspects made up to this point, because they believe that the leaders that be and all their collectivist leaders would just be able to kind of make this happen. They kind of they start to get a little bit lazy, where they actually just let be a little bit, let off the gas a little bit, and then actually people manage to get their freedom.
Certainly. And we've seen gold, like historic moves in gold and silver, and now John, I'm surrounded by Johns here. John, kind of go into this a bit. We have seen so many people speaking out against Brexit and saying that leaving the EU is racist somehow, even though it really has absolutely nothing to do with race. And then people saying that we need this union where these unelected bureaucratic pieces of shit are controlling everybody and telling everybody that they must do this and they must do that, creating like government monopolization. And it's really a fascist dictatorship in a way. So can you go into this a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think no one's been surprised by the pearl clutching and the hysterical talking points coming out of mainstream media, and especially what I've seen in the CBC in recent days.
Terrible.
It's just disgusting. The sheer globalist propaganda coming out of mouthpieces like that. And what we're told is this was basically the worst mistake that the British people could ever make. They're crazy. Their economy is going to plummet. They're pointing to the economic turbulence that inevitably is going to come from a major political event like this. I mean, this was one of the biggest political events of my lifetime, easily, up there with the Berlin Wall and everything. They're pointing to that economic turbulence and saying, see, we told you so, you're doomed, when anybody who understands what the EU actually is, which, as you just said, it is a corporate fascist bureaucracy that's completely unaccountable and completely unelected. Yeah, it's a dictatorship. Anyone who understands what it really is knows that long-term Britain is much better off out from under the EU. I mean, if you look at what the EU was actually doing to so many sectors of the economy in Britain, they're absolutely just ruining it for average working people. Like the fishing industry is probably the worst example, where they put quotas, the EU put quotas that were so restrictive and so unfair onto the British fisher people, and then just gave rights to the fishing in those same fishing grounds to Dutch trawlers, Portuguese trawlers.
And then creating monopolies. And, it's interesting because so many people are clamoring for a dictatorship. And it's insanity to see so many people trying to support the EU in this time. Not even, most of the millennials that don't know anything about the EU, can't remember what it is. And they don't realize that they're saying, oh, well, this is destroying the economy. And, okay, well, what have they been doing for the past, 20 years? What have they been doing since 1973, I believe, when Britain joined the EC? And it's like I said, it is just a basic dictatorship, and it's amazing that there has been so much pull for it, in favor of it, considering the disaster that's been created over the past several years. And the euro is a failure, and it's just amazing to me that so many people are pushing for this. And at the same time, a lot of people will say, oh, well, this is like a giant temper tantrum, and that what people are doing when they're trying to leave the EU is like causing some giant temper tantrum. No, the temper tantrum is a people that lost and can't face the fact that they lost, and they believe that, well, all these people voted against it, but what we need to do is do it, disregard the votes and say we're going to do this anyway, and that's dictatorship.
And it's extremely elitist, the talking points coming from the mainstream media. Like if you look at the British media, it's all sort of upper middle class Londoners, and they're openly just looking down their noses, even though they all claim to be socialists and want to help with poverty and all these things. They're looking down their noses at all these people in northern England and all these people in these depleted industrial areas like Birmingham and places like that, where they voted overwhelmingly in favor of leave. They're saying, oh, look at these, slimy sort of racist trailer trash. They call them chavs over there. They're like, oh, look at these chavs waving their little British flags like a bunch of soccer hooligans. And they're just basically portraying it as, oh, they're stupid sort of redneck nationalists who wanted to leave because they're dumb and racist. And in reality, these people have had their communities absolutely torn apart by what the EU has done to the British economy. And meanwhile, these people are just sitting on their, sanctimonious little subsidized thrones of, media.
Absolute elitism and control of the populace too. I mean, look at the fact that these guys have gotten away with a technical unelected dictatorship for so many years, and they're trying to play the media card. They're trying to play with the media and say that anyone that's against leaving this dictatorship is racist, when it has absolutely nothing to do with racism. It's about the movement throughout Europe itself, and it's interesting to see how Scotland has reacted to it. And John, what do you think of the way Scotland's reacted to this whole situation?
Well, Scotland acts like a little angry child, socialist child that, when they don't get their vote, like, oh, we have to redo a vote. And this is actually from a Norwegian news article that I was reading about what they're proposing now. They're proposing that they should just ignore the whole vote and then let the parliament decide. Like they said that.
Decide for them.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just an opinion from the people that they got through the through the vote, through the referendum. Or they said, just do another revote, basically, where, we're going to have to keep on doing this until we hit 60%. And of course, they're going to use all the propaganda that they have in desperate manner to try to get that.
Well, yeah, there seemed to be a bit of rigging to this whole vote too, because I mean, the fact is, the polls showed it as actually Brexit being way above what they actually won by. I believe it was like 51 to 52% with a margin of error there. And it's interesting that there's so much propaganda in the media, and it just shows that talking points can actually lose, and they're starting to lose. And I think you mentioned it before, that it was the end of talking points as we know it, and that we're seeing basically a turn of the tide between people and the propaganda that's shoved down their throats all the time.
Well, yeah, and they also say, let's do another, vote to get another government in there.
They didn't get their way, and they're saying, well, look, what we say goes, and you guys have no say in it. We're going to force you into servitude.
Yeah, and then of course you have all the people around, the European Union right now that had horrible economies like Ireland, Italy, Spain, Greece, Norway. Not a horrible economy, but it's doing pretty bad. And everybody's blaming Brexit and said that, this is going to destroy our, our economy going forward and actually moving up. When you look at the numbers, for example, in Norway, our current prime minister said, this is going to be so horrible for Norway. Well, the problem is that Norway has nothing to do with Brexit whatsoever.
Yeah.
First of all, we're not, in the ECA, which is outside of the European Union. And then second of all, we have a super low oil price, which Norway quite heavily depends on.
Yeah.
But they're not willing to say it. So it all comes down to these countries and using, the UK as a scapegoat in order to let this happen, the over leverage. Like stocks are down over 10% in most countries right now, just in 2 days, which is, quite like, the 2008 crash. But what they're going to do is they're going to just blame it on, it was all because of those crazy redneck, racists over in Britain.
And on top of that, let's just kind of look at the fact that there are some temporary, instabilities within the markets that weren't caused by betting against the Brexit and stuff like that. But there's certain stocks are at 6-year highs, and others are at lows, which we've seen quite a few stocks fall. But like you said, Deutsche Bank, the big guys, Barclays, and those guys, they've bet against leaving the EU.
Yeah, of course they did, and that's how we see, a lot of their losses. They went and took a lot of their losses, grabbed and liquidated a lot of their yen assets. That's why I saw, the Nikkei almost plummeting 9%. And then they went and, had to pay off their bad assets and their losses, to cover it.
Okay, well, here's the thing now. The big corporations have shown their love for the establishment here, where they have basically pushed the idea of staying in the EU. Yeah. And there's been a lot of that going on. Obviously, it goes to show that it's a corporatism that's a real problem. People like Jacob de Rothschild's going out there and saying that we got to stay in the EU, blah, 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 blah. But then people like his friends, Boris Johnson, are against the EU. And then people like the Queen of England is against the EU. How does that work? Because I feel like there's also a possibility of controlled opposition in the mix too here, where we see people like the Queen and people like a lot of the Rothschilds' friends on the side of Brexit, and then at the same time we see people like Jacob de Rothschild that is against Brexit, and then what's their name again? George Soros, who was against Brexit but also made a ton of money off of leaving. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, is there kind of a controlled opposition side to this whole thing? Because it feels like as long as we are still under that central bank, as long as that paper money empire is still there, as long as there is still that United Nations.
Divide and conquer right now as well. When you think about it, now we have huge oppositions, huge tearing parts, and if you go back, are you going to end up with a civil war in Great Britain?
Well, that's another thing. I think we were talking about this before, was that it kind of looks like there might be a civil war in Britain at the same time as there's a civil war in the United States. It's insane. Everyone's getting divided. Everyone is fighting, and it's such a polar divide between the individualists and then the collectivists that it seems like something really big is coming this way, and we're going to be witnessing something that can potentially be quite horrible, but also quite beneficial. What do you think?
I agree with you, and I'd say unfortunately the the divide isn't mostly between individualists or people who believe in voluntarism or libertarian ideologies and the kind of things that we believe in, because there's so few people, especially in a country like Britain, who believe in those sort of things. It's more starting to be a divide between nationalists and globalists.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that voted leave, they're not generally libertarians or people that are into the kind of philosophy we are. They're just people who are wanting to get back to their nation state.
Certainly not. They still believe in collective control of the populace.
Right, but in a nationalist sense, and as libertarians, we believe that it's good to devolve away from an unelected corporate-sponsored bureaucracy like the EU, devolve away from that centralized power to the smaller level power of the nation state, where there's more accountability. So we're praising that because it's a big step away from globalism.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a major blow to the kind of institutions that are attempting to basically rule the whole world.
Yeah.
I mean, if people think that the kind of things that are going on with the European Union aren't going on here, all they need to do is look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Absolutely.
I was talking with Josh earlier about how I wouldn't be surprised if in 20-25 years we're talking about wanting to leave the Trans-Pacific Union. It happened to them in Europe where they joined the common market, not knowing that it was going to become an unelected government that was going to tax them and regulate all their industries, and they thought they were just joining a trade deal. England did have a referendum on the common market, but they never voted to join the European Union and have it govern them and take away their sovereignty. So don't be surprised if gradually the Trans-Pacific Partnership grows into some kind of governing body. It might already have those provisions in it, because certainly we don't know. We don't have the privilege of reading it.
Well, but as I've done another report recently just on the leaks of the Bilderberg documents, where they clearly talk about the creation of these kinds of things, and we know of things like the Amero has been tried, the North American Union, NAFTA, the TPP, and this is not something new. I mean, they've been working on these things for a long time, because how can you control people more is by complete debt enslavement in a global monetary union that forces everyone under the same regulatory control and makes sure that no one can disagree with it. No one can say, I'm not going to be part of that, because it's literally creating a dictatorship around the world, a global one, where people have no say in who's in power. And even beyond that, why are these people in power? Who's consenting to this? Nobody's consenting to this.
It's done at a creeping pace. Like what we're talking about with the European Union, they were told in Britain, the common market's going to be great. Look at the economic boom going on in Germany right now. Germany was a giant powerhouse at the time.
The baby boomers.
And so they're saying, look, we want to be part of all this wealth that's, this economic boom that's going on in the continents. We need to, join up with Europe. And people said, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. And then slowly the common market needed more and more bureaucracy to oversee it, and needed more and more money put towards it. Then one day you wake up and, we're writing your laws now.
Well, let's keep in mind how this all began. It all began as this idea between, France and Britain to shake hands, and the Italy and all these countries to basically shake hands and break bread after all these years of perpetual war. And they used people's emotions like so. They said, you guys don't get along, so we're going to create this peace treaty between you guys, and this is going to change the world and make it a more peaceful place. But instead it just created a massive militarized power that completely forgot about breaking bread. It's all about one centralized power of control and a point of control,
which
where
was the
people
point
have
from
no
the
say.
first place, of course.
Well, of course, yes, but it's just the way they use it, and how we have to recognize these things in present day society when they're trying to make these changes within North America as well. And I mean, as I said from the Bilderberg documents, they're talking about how they wanted to create the EU alongside the United States and create a G2 between the two countries of one superpower. And John, can you just kind of go into how this is going to affect the markets long term? I mean, why are people so freaked out about something that's so temporary when we've seen so many worse things and the manipulation and the monopolization over the last several years?
Well, the thing about markets is, like, we're at a global scale. We're heading to the end of our monetary system. with bonds being at record lows, like they've never been this low in world history. You have most of Europe is over 60% of European bonds are negative interest rates. And then, of course, in the European Union and most Western countries, we are in the deflationary state with demographics. Actually, the baby boomer generation now being, way bigger than the millennials and so on. So there's nobody to back anybody up anymore with all this big government and pension reform and everything that's in there. So we're just going to see, like on the Western side, I believe, because we're like our growth has like stagnated now. Like we're slowing down. We're in demographic cliff, as Harry Dent calls it, where you actually are just a natural deflationary state, while these central bankers, they're not willing to stop. They don't want deflation at all, because when monetary supply deflates, actually means that money gets more expensive, and then suddenly the problem is they have so much debt, all these sovereign countries and the European Union and all of them, that they're just going to lose out and go bankrupt. Because of deflation. So they can't let this deflation happen. So they're going to come and intervene and create inflation. But the problem is, when they create that inflation, they're going to end up in a hyperinflationary state at one point, I believe, because they're going to panic and create so much money into existence.
But wouldn't that be great towards creating a world currency for them? Because that's what it's all about, really, is creating a global collapse in order to come in with this new currency.
Yeah, and then they could come in, bail it out. There have been talks about the special drawing rights, because it's right there, like it's the IMF's, global currency that they use to have settled trade between each other, the countries currently, and most countries that IMF goes in and borrows to, they borrow money to them in the special drawing right currency. So like it was a recent arms deal in Ukraine, where IMF went in and borrowed money, and that's another thing with the European Union and Ukraine. How they're trying to really push eastward and get more members, because the only way they can survive this global government is by adding more and more members. There's going to be more and more people that is needed to pay more and more of the bureaucracy that's getting created, and the unsustainability of the bigger and bigger continuous global government.
And we know this is a plan of the globalists and the creation of the New World Order, and actually just looking at what they've done over time, just in their kind of experiments throughout so-called sovereign countries, where they have openly said that their whole plan is to take away their sovereignty, basically brainwash people into giving up their sovereignty, which it also mentioned in the Bilderberg documents. Well, like the problem is they create this fiat paper money. It's based on nothing. Even when it is based on something, they're creating more IOUs than they have physically, and it creates inflation, rapid inflation. It creates debt enslavement, and it's basically a giant test to see how they can manipulate it just perfectly, so they can, put us all in debt, but not allow it to collapse quite yet, and allow it to perpetuate as long as possible in order for all of us to be in complete servitude to them.
Here's the thing. Actually, the euro has never been backed by gold and silver at all, by precious metals. It was
it's a euro. It even mentions in its original documents that the whole point was to just be a digital ledger. I mean, they mentioned that in the 90s about. I remember the euro was around for many years before it was actually printed. The first printing of the euro came many years after its original creation.
And what's coming to all of you guys in Europe that are in other European Union countries? You're going to have more of the austerity that you're seeing in Greece. You're going to have higher taxes. You're going to get more and more enslaved. You're going to lose more and more of your liberties. This is just going to be perpetual, because the great empire of the European Union, which is, we have the US empire and then we have the European empire, they're just growing again. Through history, we've seen unsustainable governments. They just collapse in on itself at one point.
It's a sinking ship. I mean, all these people just screaming economic disaster, worst decision Britain's ever made in the media. They're leaving a sinking ship. I mean, the Eurozone is an absolute basket case, as John could sit here and explain to us for hours. I mean, we just look at how terribly these countries like Greece have been doing, and just the utter failure of Europe. And it's like, how they're so stupid for wanting to get out of that. And then you look at countries like Switzerland that are in Europe but not in the European Union, that are doing so incredibly well. And they trade with the EU countries. They have their own trade deals. They don't need to be in the EU to trade. And it's like, Britain, yeah, they sure are screwed. Like, what crazy...
Well, that's something that drives me nuts
people.
Is that, look at the panic that this has caused the markets. Look what it could do, our economy, blah, blah, blah. Because these people can't think long term. They can only think temporary. This is a problem with so many of the liberals out there. And, like, the issue is, you're saying that this is causing disaster. Look at the euro. Look what's been happening for all these years. Look at the destruction. Look at the fact that these things have happened with the European Union, this fascist dictatorship and this monetary union, and look at the destruction that it's caused. Does anyone remember even a few years ago the euro crisis? Does anyone remember these
People's
things?
Memories are too short, and they can't look, because they're so addicted to the media narrative. They won't take the time to look at what the European Union actually is, which is just a central bank sponsored, corporate sponsored, unelected, bureaucratic dictatorship where corporations lobby to have all these regulations written so that they can put things like the small-time British fishing industry out of business while the big trawler companies take all the fish. So that they can put small-time manufacturing out of business because it doesn't comply with this and this regulation. I mean, they've created the most heavily overregulated climate in human history in the EU. It's just reams and reams and reams of regulations. Anything you can think of, they've got 1,000 regulations for it, and it's all been selectively enforced. It is absolutely a fascist dictatorship in the truest sense, a dictatorship by the corporations for the corporations, and that is why the average working people of Britain said no to the EU.
And absolutely.
It was nothing to do with them being trailer trash.
And furthermore, just the idea that all the news is talking about is racism. Like, it has nothing to do with monetary policy. It's just racism, and that's all they keep saying. And it has absolutely nothing to do with racism. There's nothing racist about leaving the EU. And the idea of these people, like these talking points, they just keep throwing it out there over and over and over again, and then people start repeating it. Because you repeat something long enough, people will start believing it without actually doing research because they're lazy. People who keep repeating CBC, CBS, NBC, CNN talking points are lazy. They aren't doing their own research. They're just listening to that talking point and they say, oh, well, that sounds good because that guy's research, right? I'm not going to bother researching myself because, let's just push aside the possibility of complete state-run propaganda and just this push for the establishment. These people are fucking ridiculous. They have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. My say is, fuck you. I do not consent to you taking away my humanity, and I think every human being, every individual should say the same thing. I just want to pass it on quickly to both of you because we're running out of time. What do you say to those that believe that that they should stay in the European Union and that the European Union is a good thing?
Get out before you drown.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's insane, and like you said, it's like jumping off a sinking ship. What do you have to say to those that want to stay in the European Union?
I'd have to say, you're probably on the teat of EU funding if you live in Britain and you want to stay. I mean, that's the thing that we have to remember more than anything when we look at the BBC, when we look at all the media pundits and the trendy academics. All those trendy academics in Britain who love the EU, they get EU grants. Of course they love the EU. They don't want the funding to dry up. The EU has been masterful in just buying off the intelligentsia of Europe and Britain and, just making them all so happy with all this funding, all this money that's just floating around that they'll never criticize it. But the average people weren't benefiting from it, and they finally said no.
Absolutely, and that is the bottom line. They said no. Let's leave it at that. The idea of coming in and overriding that vote is absurd, and everyone should question their own ethics and morality for supporting such a thing. And of course, going forward, we're going to be hearing a lot more about this. A lot of the trendy liberals pushing this idea that they're somehow doing something horrible when it's basically just coming out of a complete fascist dictatorship.
We'll hear a lot more about
turning it down.
Sorry. Yeah, we'll hear a lot more about it because Jeremy Corbyn is saying that if he's elected in the coming general election, he's going to bring Britain back into the EU.
Well, which shows how much he thinks of you guys, the people who voted, and how much he believes that you know what the proper way to go. He thinks that he knows better than everyone else, and his one idea should collectively be put as a blanket over everyone in society.
It's going to hurt him a lot, though, in the coming election because a lot of Labour voters voted Leave.
Yeah.
A lot of people in those poor working class towns in northern England, they vote Labour, but they're not on board with a lot of what leftism is today.
Yeah.
They're more old Labour. They're pro-nationalism, but they're also, want some of the welfare state.
Yep.
But those people aren't going to be voting Labour in the next election if that's part of the platform, is
Absolutely.
going back in the EU. So
Yeah.
he's shooting himself in the foot by
Yeah.
doing that.
Don't listen to politicians. Like, I'm getting so sick and tired of like people that think that they can listen to politicians and what they say. It's like, oh, he's going to change things. Like, give me a break.
You
like,
change things,
like,
you as an
we've
individual.
seen this right here in our own province. We had, the so-called conservatives, coming in and saying
And
that
they're
they're
not
going to change
conservatives.
things.
Yeah.
No, they're total opposite. Like, all these guys are
Collectivist
collectivist pigs. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And they're just for a big, gigantic government.
Okay, well, finishing up, thank you guys for talking about this. This is such a pertinent issue. It's something that we need to focus on more and realize that this is coming to us too. Globalism is something that involves all of us, and unfortunately, without consent, they are trying to control us as individuals, and we need to stand up and say, you will not take away my humanity. I am a free human being, and what you say doesn't blanket over every single individual as a collective because you think you have a harebrained idea and you're going to force it on everybody else. So, closing up, thank you guys. This is Josh Sigurdson, John Doull, John Sneisen, signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Thank you.